Hello, another little vlog. Um, no particular subject in this one, just a few odds and ends that have come to my attention over the past week or so, basically, and I thought I'd talk about them. Um, One is another little carry-on from Brexit, because I've seen it mentioned quite a few times that people are resentful of the older generation for voting for Brexit. Um, like the baby boomers have been selfish once again. I suppose there may be an element of that, but there's also another side to it, which is, of course, that people aged 50 plus have seen what Britain was like before it joined the EU, and they've had 50 years almost to watch the trend since joining the EU. So maybe their experience is saying something. And it's not just sheer, let's keep out all the immigrants rubbish, right? Although most people's concern is about people taking their jobs, as far as vocalizations of it are concerned, as far as I can see. But don't worry, there's going to be robots taking our jobs anyway, so it's irrelevant. Just thought I'd throw that in. I've come across this website called crowdsondemand.com, I think it is. And I don't like to advertise it, so I'm not going to link to it, okay? but the idea is they have up to 20,000 film extras, amateur actors or whatever, out of work, unemployed people, willing to go and protest, or pretend to protest. All you have to do is hire them, right? It's a sort of a rent-a-crowd type of thing. So, you want to organise a protest. If you're rich, well, you hire a bunch of protesters who will come along and protest. The owner of the website just says, well, this is democracy in action. Well, actually, no, it's undermining democracy. It's freedom in action in terms of financial freedom. If you're rich, you can rent a crowd, you can get a crowd on demand. I think, though, the people who do this, I mean, okay, people do it for money, but maybe they should be ashamed of themselves, actually, because it's actually undermining democracy. It makes protests a nonsense. I've never been that impressed by the power of protest anyway. But especially in recent years, governments have learned to ignore them. Like the war on Iraq, for example, where we had hundreds of thousands of people protesting against it. It made absolutely no difference whatsoever. Oh yes, you can protest, we'll just ignore it. That's okay. It's like people have got wise to this other trick that governments and councils do, which is to have consultations where they consult and then do what they wanted to do anyway. It's just complete nonsense. So it's kind of falling into disuse because people have realised it's just a trick. There's a kind of a thing now, it's happened a lot throughout history, but of violent protests where agitators get in and start causing deliberate trouble. I think violent protests are likely to be less effective on the whole than ordinary protests, which is one thing. And also, quite often the violent protesters are actually just the same kind of people who they're supposedly protesting against. And this is a reason why I think violent revolutions are generally, not always, but generally doomed to fail. Because violent revolutions are... A revolution tends to happen against people or powers that believe in the use of violence. So if you manage to oust them with your own bunch of violent protesters. So you're not changing anything significant. There'll be cosmetic changes, but you're replacing one group of people who believe in the use of violence with another group of people who believe in the use of violence. The madness remains. What about... I mean, this was clear, say, in the Russian Revolution. It was really obvious what happened, okay? The monarchy was ruthless. They were replaced with even more ruthless Bolsheviks, right? It was hopeless. It was only when somebody who didn't believe too much in the use of violence, Gorbachev, came in and let the lid off, that it all ended. The American Revolution is a bit more of a subtle case. In a way, it's kind of like the British, who definitely believe in the use of violence and still do, thought, well, let's have an experiment and we'll pretend to give them some freedom, right? Okay, so the Americans fought for it and won. Whether the British really wanted to let them win or not, I don't know. Not privy to those conspiracies. But the upshot is the Americans won. And then proceeded to continue with the use of violence, exterminating most of the Native Americans, deliberately trying to kill all of the Iroquois, but failing, as it happens. Building a worldwide empire, 800 odd military bases around the world now. Picking on nations as defined in the Project for the New American Century paperwork. Libya, Syria, Iraq, North Korea. They haven't picked on Lebanon yet. It was in the list, I think, but well, we'll see. Why North Korea? It has a long border with China. And a small border with Russia, actually. But probably the Chinese border is the one. It's not very far from Beijing and Shanghai, so if the Americans can get established there, they're in a good strategic position for a war with China, or ultimately even Russia. That they'll be surrounding them, which is their strategy. But anyway, that's revolutions, my thinking about revolutions. And yes, the American people think they've got some freedom, but it's a kind of a strange freedom. It's being taken away, basically, over time. And it's particularly happening to the younger generation now, where they have these apps and, you know, Snapchat and WhatsApp and what have you. They change all the time, but whatever. Where they're sitting there looking at chit-chat all day, every day. Facebook and Instagram are so boring. You stick a picture up and you make some dumb comment and wait for some thumbs up or some people to like it, and you think, oh, aren't I great? People wake up in the morning, the first thing they do is reach for their phone to see what rubbish they've missed and to make some likes and comments and stuff. Apparently, I was reading that a large proportion of this generation have never been alone, to the exclusion of apps and other people, for more than 4 hours other than when asleep, in their entire lives. What is this doing to the human mind? It's rather strange. In fact, it's kind of what Aldous Huxley said in Brave New World. he said that people would grow to love the methods used to deprive them of the power of thinking. And that's what's happening, because these apps, they grab your attention so much that you don't have time for thinking. You're distracted within a few seconds. There's no real opportunity to think for yourself. Everything is bounced off other people who give you their inane first impressions. And that's as deep as it goes. And the app makers are harvesting people's ability to think in the same way as in the past people would harvest a forest or other natural resources, without regard to the long-term harm that it's doing. So in the information age, we're not just harvesting the outer world, we're harvesting inner space as well. And we will have a generation who are completely controlled by those who are smart enough to know what's going on, and evil enough to take advantage of it. The politicians and their controllers, the corporates, and their controllers, whoever they may be, if anyone. The other thing that's happened this week is the Labour Party in Britain has decided, after a lot of squabbling, to adopt the full international definition of anti-Semitism, because they were arguing about it, because the bit that they didn't like, and I agree with them, is that the definition says that criticising the Israeli government is anti-Semitic. By that they mean anti-Jewish. That's crazy to me. I mean, and they've adopted it, which I think is just moral cowardice. They've decided in the end, because of all the protests and renter-mouths slagging them off, they've finally caved in and decided to adopt that measure. But, I mean, I can understand Jewish people being sensitive and perhaps needing an extra level of protection, given history. Because there's been pogroms and slaughters and discrimination going back thousands of years. And certainly over the last 2,000 years there's been some big issue every century, pretty much. So yeah, they're sensitive and maybe they need some extra protection, but criticising the Israeli government, I don't see that as anti-Jewish. I mean, if I criticise a government, it's because I want it to be better. And if it's better, then the lives of the people living there will be better too. If I criticise the British government, it's because I want it to be better here, right? If I criticise Donald Trump, am I anti-American? Surely not. Seriously? It's just mad. Okay. Complete madness. And I'm sorry to see that the Labour Party are a bunch of moral cowards and have caved in to criticism. If your friends criticise you, sometimes they're destructive narcissists and you know, get rid of them, right? Take them out of your life. But if they're actually trying to help you, well, you know, take it on the chin. Any thoughts? Don't spend too much time on the apps, eh? Okay, bye for now.